If you ever have to choose between following orders and saving a life, you will remember that choice forever. Those were the first words I heard before the freezing Atlantic swallowed me whole. One moment I was reaching for the frightened father clinging to the rescue basket beneath the helicopter, and the next a wall of wind slammed into us hard enough to throw me into the dark water below. The cold stole every breath before panic had the chance. I could barely see the flashing lights above as enormous waves rolled over my head again and again. Somewhere beyond the roaring storm, I heard a voice shouting my name through the radio. Mason. It sounded closer than it should have. Then another voice barked an order that disappeared beneath the wind. I forced my eyes open just long enough to see someone leap from the rescue helicopter after me. Even through the rain, I recognized the unmistakable outline of Captain Adrian Hayes. He was not supposed to leave the aircraft. He was not supposed to abandon command. He was definitely not supposed to risk his own life for the newest rescue swimmer on the team. The last thing I remembered before everything faded into darkness was his hand closing firmly around my jacket and his calm voice saying, "I have you." When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was a white hospital ceiling. Machines hummed softly beside my bed, while warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the floor. My throat felt dry, my muscles ached, and every memory returned all at once. Before I could sit up, someone quietly spoke from the chair beside the window. "I almost lost you." Captain Adrian Hayes looked like he had not slept in days. His Navy rescue uniform was still wrinkled, and faint shadows rested beneath his blue eyes. For the first time since I had met him, he did not look like the fearless leader everyone admired. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a decision he could never take back. I wanted to answer, but no words came. Instead, the steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between us. Adrian stood slowly, keeping a respectful distance from my bed. "You do not have to say anything," he said quietly. "Just focus on getting better." Before I could ask why he had jumped into the ocean for me, another nurse entered the room, and Adrian stepped aside without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, I realized something had changed forever between us. 3 weeks earlier, none of this seemed possible. 3 weeks earlier, Captain Adrian Hayes had barely known my name. I was simply the newest member of Coast Guard Rescue Station 12, a 24-year-old rookie determined to prove I belonged among men and women who had spent years saving lives along one of the most dangerous coastlines in America. My first morning began before sunrise as thick sea fog drifted across the harbor. Rescue boats rocked gently against the docks while helicopters waited silently on the flight line. The air smelled of salt, diesel fuel, and fresh coffee. I tightened the straps on my gear bag and stared across the water, repeating every reason I had worked so hard to earn my place there. Then the station doors opened. Conversation stopped almost instantly, and Captain Adrian Hayes walked into the briefing room. Calm, confident, completely focused. He did not raise his voice to command respect. He never needed to. His eyes briefly met mine before he looked at the rest of the team. "Welcome to Station 12, he said. "Out there, mistakes cost lives. Leave your pride at the dock." I nodded with everyone else, never imagining that the hardest thing I would face would not be the ocean. It would be falling hopelessly in love with the one man I could never allow myself to have. Morning routines at Station 12 quickly taught me that the ocean did not care about confidence, talent, or ambition. Every sunrise brought another lesson, another drill, another reminder that every decision carried responsibility far beyond yourself. I arrived before dawn every day, determined to be the first rookie ready for inspection, but Captain Adrian Hayes was always there before me. Sometimes he stood quietly at the end of the dock watching the tide roll in. Other mornings he reviewed weather reports with a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He acknowledged everyone with the same calm professionalism, never showing favorites, never wasting words. I admired that discipline more than I wanted to admit. The first week became a blur of rescue swimming exercises, navigation practice, equipment inspections, and emergency response simulations. My muscles protested every evening, and my hands developed blisters despite wearing gloves. Still, I refused to complain. Every member of the crew had earned their place through hard work, and I wanted to prove that I belonged beside them. During one afternoon training session, we practiced helicopter rescue procedures above the harbor. Strong coastal winds pushed against the aircraft while each swimmer rehearsed the same sequence repeatedly. I completed every instruction exactly as I had been taught. Yet when my turn ended, Captain Hayes simply looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You completed every step correctly," he said. My chest lifted with quiet pride until he continued. "Now stop thinking about the checklist and start paying attention to the person you are trying to save. Procedures matter because people matter." His words stayed with me long after training ended. That evening, while I sat alone on the dock cleaning my gear, I watched him help one of the mechanics carry heavy equipment into the storage building without being asked. Nobody applauded him. Nobody even seemed surprised. He simply noticed someone needed help and acted. It was such an ordinary moment, yet somehow it revealed more about his character than any speech could have. Over the following days, I caught myself watching him more often than I should have. The way he listened carefully before making decisions. The quiet confidence in his voice during team briefings. The patience he showed whenever another rookie struggled with a difficult skill. Every small moment made it harder to keep emotional distance, even though I reminded myself that he was my captain first and nothing else. One rainy afternoon, after a long rescue simulation, I slipped slightly while carrying a coil of wet rope across the pier. I caught my balance before falling, embarrassed that several teammates had noticed. Captain Hayes walked over, took half the weight without a word, and helped me finish carrying it to the equipment room. "You do not have to prove your strength every minute," he said with a faint smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. "You are part of a team now." I thanked him, but the simple kindness unsettled me more than any demanding drill ever could. As he walked away, Lieutenant Derek Collins happened to step into the hallway. His eyes shifted from the rope in Adrian's hands to my expression before settling into a look that was impossible to read. He said nothing at all, but somehow that silence felt like the beginning of a problem neither of us could yet see. Lieutenant Derek Collins never confronted me directly after that afternoon in the equipment room, but I started noticing him far more often than before. Whenever Captain Hayes assigned training groups, Derek seemed to be watching from somewhere nearby. During morning briefings, his eyes lingered on both of us just a second longer than they did on anyone else. I told myself I was imagining things because I already felt self-conscious about the growing admiration I carried for my captain, yet every passing day made it more difficult to ignore the quiet tension building around the station. A week later, the forecast predicted heavy rain, rough seas, and powerful offshore winds. Captain Hayes gathered the team before sunrise and explained that the conditions were ideal for advanced rescue training because real emergencies rarely happened beneath clear blue skies. We loaded equipment onto one of the rescue boats and headed several miles away from shore. Gray clouds stretched endlessly across the horizon while the ocean rolled beneath us with slow, restless swells. Even though this was only another exercise, everyone treated it with complete seriousness. Captain Hayes believed practice should feel as real as possible because hesitation during an actual rescue could cost precious time. My assignment seemed simple enough. I would enter the water, approach a floating training mannequin, secure it correctly, and guide it toward the rescue basket while maintaining constant communication with the crew above. I had completed similar drills before, but as soon as I entered the cold water that morning, everything felt different. Strong currents pushed against me from unexpected directions, rain blurred my vision, and the helicopter circling overhead filled the air with a steady roar. For a brief moment, I lost sight of the rescue basket, and my breathing became faster than I wanted to admit. I knew the correct procedures. I knew every step by memory. Yet my thoughts scattered beneath the pressure until the instructions in my head sounded distant and disconnected. Then Captain Hayes spoke through my headset. His voice remained calm, steady, and completely free of panic. "Mason, do not fight the water. Slow your breathing. Find my voice. One step at a time." I closed my eyes for only a heartbeat and listened. The rain was still falling. The waves were still rising. Nothing around me had changed except the rhythm of my breathing. "Good," he continued. "You already know what to do. Trust your training." His confidence somehow became my own. I located the basket, completed the recovery exactly as instructed, and finished the exercise without another mistake. When I climbed back aboard the rescue boat, my uniform was soaked, but my hands had finally stopped shaking. The rest of the crew congratulated me on completing one of the most difficult training scenarios of the month. Captain Hayes simply handed me a dry towel and offered the smallest nod of approval. It lasted less than a second, yet somehow it meant more than any speech or award ever could. As the boat returned toward Station 12 beneath the fading rain, I stood quietly beside him at the railing, watching sunlight slowly break through the clouds. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward, as though words would only interrupt something neither of us fully understood. Across the deck, Lieutenant Derek Collins looked in our direction before quietly turning away, and although nothing had happened that anyone else would consider unusual, I could not shake the uneasy feeling that someone had already begun drawing conclusions long before either Captain Hayes or I had recognized what was quietly growing between us. Life at Station 12 settled into a rhythm that almost made me believe my feelings could remain safely hidden. Every morning began with weather briefings, equipment inspections, and rescue assignments, followed by hours of training that demanded complete focus. Captain Adrian Hayes treated every member of the team with the same steady professionalism, and if anyone had asked whether he favored me, I would have answered without hesitation that he did not. He corrected my mistakes just as quickly as everyone else's, expected the same high standards from me, and never allowed personal conversations to interfere with work. Yet somehow the smallest moments stayed with me. He remembered that I preferred checking my own equipment before every drill instead of relying on the inspection sheet alone. He noticed when exhaustion showed on my face before I admitted I needed a short break. He had an incredible ability to recognize when someone needed encouragement without making them feel weak. Those quiet acts of leadership became impossible for me to forget. One afternoon, after a long day of navigation exercises, the entire crew gathered in the station kitchen for coffee before heading home. The conversation drifted from baseball to weekend plans and eventually to stories about difficult rescues from previous years. I mostly listened, grateful simply to be included. Captain Hayes stepped into the room only long enough to refill his coffee before returning to his office with another stack of reports. As soon as the door closed behind him, one of the older crew members smiled and joked that the captain probably worked more hours than anyone else in the Coast Guard. Laughter filled the room until someone casually added that Captain Hayes seemed especially invested in making sure the newest rookie succeeded. The remark sounded harmless, but the sudden silence that followed lasted just long enough for everyone to notice. Before anyone could continue, Lieutenant Derek Collins calmly placed his coffee mug onto the counter. He smiled politely, yet there was something measured behind the expression. A good captain helps every member of the team, he said evenly. The important thing is making sure everyone receives exactly the same attention. His words sounded perfectly reasonable, but I could feel the meaning underneath them. Nobody answered. The conversation quickly shifted toward the weather forecast, although the comfortable atmosphere had quietly disappeared. Later that evening, I stayed behind to organize rescue ropes inside the equipment bay. Captain Hayes entered carrying several maintenance reports and noticed I was still working long after most of the crew had gone home. "You can finish that tomorrow," he said. "The equipment will still be here." I smiled awkwardly. "I know. I just wanted everything ready before morning." He nodded with quiet approval. "Responsibility is a good habit. Just remember that rest is also part of doing the job well." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed from the hallway. Lieutenant Collins appeared at the open doorway, glanced briefly at both of us, and held up a folder. "Captain, the district office needs your signature before 6. Adrian thanked him, accepted the paperwork, and immediately walked away without another word. Derek remained standing for a brief moment after the captain disappeared. He looked directly at me with an unreadable expression before saying quietly, "People notice more than you think, Mason." Then he turned and left the equipment bay, leaving me completely alone with those 6 words echoing through my mind. For the first time since arriving at Station 12, I realized that the greatest danger might not come from the unpredictable ocean at all, but from the assumptions people were beginning to make long before either Captain Hayes or I had crossed any line. The weather changed without much warning the following week, and everyone at Station 12 could feel it long before the official forecast arrived. Dark clouds gathered beyond the horizon. The wind carried a sharper edge, and every radio update mentioned that a powerful coastal storm was expected to reach our sector before sunrise. Preparation replaced casual conversation. Rescue boats were refueled, Medical supplies were checked twice, and every piece of emergency equipment was carefully inspected. The station moved with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that preparation was often the difference between bringing someone home safely or arriving too late. Captain Adrian Hayes remained exactly as he always was, calm, organized, and completely focused on the work in front of him. During the evening briefing, he assigned every crew member a specific responsibility before looking around the room one final time. "The forecast may change by the hour," he said. "Stay flexible, trust your training, and communicate clearly. Nobody works alone tomorrow." His eyes briefly met mine before continuing around the room, and although the moment lasted only a second, I immediately remembered Lieutenant Derek Collins' warning that people noticed more than I thought. After the meeting ended, I deliberately stayed behind to organize medical kits with another rescue swimmer instead of offering to help Adrian as I normally would have. It felt strangely unnatural, but I convinced myself that creating more distance was the responsible decision. Over the next 2 days, I avoided unnecessary conversations with him whenever possible. If he approached to review my equipment, I kept my answers short. If we happened to walk toward the same hallway, I found another task waiting somewhere else. Every decision seemed small by itself, yet together they created an invisible wall that neither of us acknowledged aloud. The hardest part was realizing that Adrian noticed the change almost immediately. He never questioned me in front of the crew, never asked why I seemed more distant, and never showed the slightest frustration. Instead, he respected the space I had created even though it quietly hurt more than I expected. On the third evening, while most of the station was preparing for the approaching storm, I stepped outside onto the dock to clear my thoughts. The harbor looked unusually still beneath the gray sky, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. A few moments later, I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Captain Hayes stopped several feet away, leaving plenty of respectful distance between us. "You have been avoiding me," he said gently. It was not an accusation. It sounded more like quiet concern. I stared across the water before answering honestly. "I think it is better if people only see us talking when we have to." He remained silent for several seconds, watching the waves instead of looking directly at me. Finally, he nodded once. "If that makes your work easier, I will respect it." There was no disappointment in his voice, only understanding, and somehow that made the conversation even more difficult. Before either of us could say anything else, Lieutenant Derek Collins called from the operations building that updated weather reports had just arrived. Adrian acknowledged him immediately and walked back toward the station without another word. I remained alone on the dock, listening to the wind grow stronger with every passing minute. As the first drops of rain touched the surface of the harbor, an emergency alert suddenly echoed across the entire station, signaling that the approaching storm had already brought the first call for help far sooner than anyone had expected. The station transformed within minutes after the emergency alert echoed through every hallway. Conversations stopped, coffee cups were abandoned, and everyone moved with calm purpose toward their assigned positions. The storm that had been sitting offshore all day was now pushing towering waves toward the coastline, and reports of a disabled recreational fishing boat had just come through. A family was stranded several miles from shore after losing power, and worsening weather meant there was very little time before conditions became even more dangerous. Captain Adrian Hayes stood at the operations table studying updated radar, while assigning responsibilities with the same steady confidence that had always made the entire crew trust him. I listened carefully as he reviewed the mission, repeating every instruction in my mind until each detail felt automatic. Even though I had spent the past several days keeping my distance from him, the familiar calm in his voice immediately settled the nervous energy building inside me. Minutes later, our rescue helicopter lifted into the dark sky while another crew prepared the response boat. Below, rain streaked across the windows as we crossed the coastline, and powerful gusts reminded everyone that nature always demanded respect. Through the headset, Captain Hayes continued giving short, clear updates without raising his voice. Every instruction was precise. Every movement inside the aircraft reflected countless hours of training. When we reached the reported location, flashing emergency lights from the disabled boat appeared between the rolling waves. The family had already put on life jackets and followed every instruction from emergency dispatch, making our work much easier. As rescue preparations began, One unexpected wave shifted the position of the rescue basket just as I started moving toward it. For one brief second, my concentration followed the changing equipment instead of the larger situation around me. I corrected immediately, but I knew I had allowed the pressure of the moment to interrupt my focus. Before doubt could spread through my thoughts, Captain Hayes spoke through the headset with the same reassuring tone I had heard during training. "Mason, stay with the process. You already know exactly what to do." His words slowed everything inside my mind. I took one careful breath, centered my attention on the family waiting below, and completed each step exactly as we had practiced. One by one, every passenger reached safety, and the final confirmation from the flight crew brought a quiet sense of relief across the entire aircraft. Nobody celebrated. Professional crews understood that every mission ended only after everyone returned safely to base. During the flight home, the cabin remained mostly silent except for routine communication. I noticed Lieutenant Derek Collins watching Captain Hayes several times as mission reports were reviewed, his thoughtful expression revealing nothing. After we landed, equipment inspections and paperwork continued long into the evening. I expected Captain Hayes to correct the brief mistake I had made over the water, but instead he waited until the others had finished their reports. "You recovered quickly," he said. "Confidence is not about being perfect. It is about recognizing a mistake before it grows into something larger." I thanked him quietly, understanding that he had chosen to teach rather than criticize. As I turned to leave the operations room, I noticed Derek standing just outside the partially open door, holding a folder that had clearly been forgotten in his hand. He had been there long enough to hear every word, and although his expression remained calm, I could not ignore the feeling that he was beginning to see our professional trust through a very different lens, one that threatened to change far more than either Captain Hayes or I realized. The storm finally moved north, leaving behind calm water, clear skies, and a station that should have felt relieved after another successful rescue. Instead, an uneasy silence settled over Station 12. It began with a routine notice posted outside the operations office announcing that the previous mission would undergo a standard administrative review because of the unusual weather conditions. Nobody seemed concerned at first. Reviews happened after difficult operations all the time, and they were meant to improve future responses rather than assign blame. Even so, I noticed Lieutenant Derek Collins collecting mission logs, communication records, and training reports with unusual attention to detail. He remained polite with everyone, but every question he asked seemed to circle back to Captain Adrian Hayes and the decisions made during the rescue. 2 days later, I was called into a small conference room where Derek sat with a recorder and a stack of documents. He thanked me for coming, explained that the discussion was routine, and asked me to describe every moment I remembered from the mission. I answered honestly. I admitted that I had briefly lost focus when the rescue basket shifted unexpectedly before quickly recovering. I explained that Captain Hayes had reminded me to trust my training and stay with the process. Derek wrote several notes before looking up. "Do you believe Captain Hayes gave you more guidance than he would have given another rescue swimmer?" The question caught me completely off guard. I shook my head without hesitation. "No. He gave me exactly what every captain should give a member of the team during a stressful situation." Derek studied my expression for a long moment before ending the interview with a courteous smile that revealed nothing. Later that afternoon, I learned that Captain Hayes had also been interviewed by district supervisors. He continued working exactly as he always had, refusing to discuss the review with anyone on the crew. His calm professionalism somehow made the uncertainty feel even heavier. I could not stop thinking about the conversation in the conference room. If anyone believed that Adrian had treated me differently because of personal feelings, then my own emotions had become a danger to his career, even though I had never spoken about them to anyone. That realization stayed with me all night. The following morning, I walked into the administrative office and requested another meeting with the review team. When Derek asked why I had returned, I spoke as clearly as I could. If anyone believes there was unnecessary attention placed on me during that mission, then responsibility belongs with me. I was the rookie. I was the one who hesitated. Captain Hayes responded exactly as a leader should. If my performance created additional pressure for him, I accept full responsibility for that. Derek remained silent until I finished. He closed the folder in front of him and quietly replied, "Responsibility is rarely carried by only one person. Mason. I thanked him anyway and left the office feeling no lighter than before. That evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the harbor, I found Captain Hayes standing alone at the end of the dock watching the tide roll in. He did not ask why I looked troubled, and I did not tell him about my second interview. We stood several feet apart, listening to the waves in comfortable silence until he finally spoke. No matter what happens, never carry a burden that does not belong entirely to you. I looked toward the fading horizon, wondering if he somehow already knew what I had done, and for the first time I realized that protecting someone you cared about could become just as complicated as admitting that you cared at all. The administrative review continued through the rest of the week, but life at Station 12 refused to stop simply because uncertainty had settled over everyone. Rescue crews still trained before sunrise, equipment still needed inspection, and emergency calls still arrived without warning. Captain Adrian Hayes carried out every responsibility with the same calm professionalism that had first earned my respect, yet I could sense the quiet weight he was carrying behind the composed expression he showed the crew. He never complained, never defended himself, and never spoke about the review unless someone asked a direct operational question. Watching him remain steady while rumors quietly spread throughout the station only deepened my admiration and my guilt. I convinced myself that the best way to protect him was to continue keeping my distance. But the more I tried, the more unnatural every interaction became. We had once spoken easily about training, weather conditions, and rescue techniques. Now every conversation felt carefully measured, as though invisible walls had been built between us. One evening, after the rest of the crew had gone home, I stayed behind to finish inventory inside the equipment storage building. The station was unusually quiet, broken only by the distant sound of waves meeting the harbor. As I closed the final storage locker, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Captain Hayes standing in the open doorway. He did not step inside immediately. Instead, he waited until I nodded before entering, giving me the choice to end the conversation if I wished. "May we talk for a few minutes?" he asked. His voice remained calm, but there was a sincerity I had never heard before. I quietly agreed. For several moments, neither of us spoke. He looked around the room as though searching for the right words before finally meeting my eyes. "You have spent weeks trying to protect my reputation," he said. "I appreciate your intentions, but you cannot carry responsibility for choices that belong to me." I started to apologize, but he gently shook his head. "Please let me finish." I remained silent. He drew a slow breath before continuing. "The reason I kept a careful distance from you was never because you lacked ability. It was because I recognized how easy it would have been for professional respect to become something more personal if I allowed myself to forget my position. A captain owes every member of the crew fairness above everything else. I could not allow my own feelings, whatever they might become, to place either of us in a situation where people questioned every decision I made. My heart seemed to stop for a single impossible moment. He had not spoken the words directly, yet I understood exactly what he meant. He had felt the same quiet pull that I had struggled to hide for weeks, and he had chosen responsibility over his own heart long before I realized what was happening inside mine. I looked down at the floor, searching for words that refused to come. Finally, I managed to whisper, "I never wanted to make your life harder." He smiled with quiet warmth, the first genuine smile I had seen from him in days. "You did not. Caring about someone is never the mistake. Forgetting our responsibilities would have been." Before either of us could continue, a notification sounded from the operations office announcing that the District Review Board had reached its final decision and requested Captain Hayes to report immediately, leaving both of us standing in silence as the future we had both tried so hard to protect suddenly rested in someone else's hands. Captain Adrian Hayes returned from the district office just before sunset, carrying the same folder he had taken with him earlier that afternoon. Every member of Station 12 paused for a moment as he stepped into the operations room, but he simply thanked everyone for their patience and asked the crew to continue preparing for the next day's assignments. Nothing about his expression revealed what had happened. I spent the rest of the evening trying to focus on routine maintenance, yet my thoughts never drifted far from that closed office door. Just before the end of my shift, Lieutenant Derek Collins found me near the equipment lockers. His voice remained calm as always. "The review has been completed," he said. I waited for the words that would determine everything. "The board found that Captain Hayes acted within policy during the rescue. His decisions reflected proper leadership under difficult conditions. There will be no disciplinary action. Relief washed over me so quickly that I had to steady my breathing before answering. Derek studied me for a quiet moment before adding something I never expected to hear. The board also noted your willingness to accept responsibility for your own hesitation. That honesty mattered. He gave a small, respectful nod before walking away, leaving me with the realization that perhaps he had never been trying to destroy anyone's career. He had simply been determined to protect the integrity of the station. A few days later, I received official notice that I had successfully completed the final phase of my probationary training and would soon transfer to another Coast Guard station several hundred miles away. Promotions and transfers were a normal part of the job, yet reading my new assignment somehow made the harbor outside feel smaller than it ever had before. On my final evening at Station 12, I stood alone at the end of the dock watching the sun disappear beneath the horizon, remembering my first morning there when everything had felt uncertain. I heard familiar footsteps behind me and smiled before I even turned around. Adrian stopped beside me, leaving the same respectful distance he had always maintained. "Congratulations," he said. "You earned this." I thanked him quietly before admitting that leaving felt more difficult than I had expected. He looked across the calm water for several seconds before speaking again. "There is something I can finally say now that I could not say while I was your captain." My heart raced, but I remained silent. He smiled with the same warmth I had seen only once before. "You are no longer reporting to me. The responsibilities that kept me silent no longer stand between us." He paused just long enough for me to understand exactly what he meant. "Would you let me take you to dinner when your schedule allows?" I laughed softly, partly from relief and partly because I had imagined that moment so many times without believing it could ever become real. "I would like that very much," I answered. 6 months later, after settling into my new station, I returned to the same harbor for a long weekend. Adrian was already waiting near the dock with 2 cups of coffee and the calm smile that had first captured my attention months before. Nothing about our future felt rushed. We had built trust before hope, respect before romance, and friendship before love. As we walked together beside the quiet water beneath a clear American sky, I realized that the greatest rescue of my life had never happened during a storm. It happened because 2 people chose patience, honesty, and responsibility until the right moment finally allowed their hearts to meet without fear.